This week's episode of Astonishing Legends is supported in part by Harrys.com, The Great Courses Plus, and Squarespace.
And
I'm not going to say it. We need something new.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Time to move on.
All right, yes. Well, what's going on with the the Count of St. Germain?
Well, it's funny you should ask. We took all the suggestions we had for his next iteration, and our crack team selected our 10 favorites, which I sent over to him.
And?
He's got them, but we couldn't get a time sorted out to get on the phone, so we're waiting for a gap in his schedule to get him back on and announce the winner of the new Count of St. Germain contest.
Good deal. Well, I suppose he does have all the time in the world, what with being immortal and all.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
They had the people to do it, and would have forced us to surrender if we didn't have bombs also. We had no choice, or we thought we had no choice. Leo Zillard, the man who patented the nuclear reactor, referring to Nazi Germany during World War II.
Join us tonight for part 2 of our series on the Nazi Bell as we look at what it might have been and where it might actually be today. Okay, so it's time to talk about what exactly the bell was. Some people have we had a few notes where people were like, I listened to that whole first one. I still wasn't sure what it was. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
No one is sure what it was. It's hard.
That's
it's
a good
hard
point.
for us to say what it was because it is not around. There are no pictures of it. There's only this paper trail that was first discovered by Igor Witkowski when he was allowed to take a look at what the Polish intelligence officer brought him these documents that were from an interrogation of an SS officer who made indications about this item being moved out of the area as the war drew to a close.
Yes, so to recap how the information came to light, Igor was contacted by a Polish intelligence agent who wanted to see if he knew anything about this because they had classified interrogation documents, as Scott just said, of real SS generals, Jakob Sporenberg, bad dude.
Yes.
As they all were. But he is a real guy that is prominent in the war. You can look him up. What Sporenberg apparently had were documents or related stories about these documents as well that were evacuation protocol orders. These are official documents that explain basically what the orders are, the procedures, the protocols of removing this sophisticated piece of research material, this machine.
This machine, and that's what we want to talk about tonight. We want to enlighten you as much as we can with some more specifics about it so you can at least start to take a look at it in your mind's eye.
Right, and if you're putting together IKEA furniture or jogging or doing something noisy, you might want to come back to this later or just ignore it and forget about knowing what it is because it's a little complicated in some of the science and technology areas, but basically it's just a big machine that is shaped like a bell. That is also why it's thought possibly to have been the Kecksburg craft, which we also got complaints about people not understanding what that was.
Yeah.
Just go look up the GE Mark II reentry vehicle. That'll give you an idea of what the shape is. That's at least one major theory that John Ventry, our guest, had concluded. It wasn't this Nazi bell. But a lot of other people do believe, though, that the Nazi bell, at least the technology, was involved with the Kecksburg crash, and that's maybe what got that thing to crash in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
So that's what the confusion is there. Now, the bell, as far as we know, is not a flying device. You can't stand up in it.
You wouldn't want to get in it.
You wouldn't want, yes.
Just turning it on kills people.
Right. You don't want to be anywhere near it, which is why some have said that the test area was lined with ceramic bricks. Now, that also ties in with the other theory proposed by some people like Dr. Joseph Farrell that the delivery of bricks that John Ventry mentioned at Wright-Patterson Air Force, and that's where the guy who was delivering the ceramic bricks said,
Yes.
well, I saw a hand pop out and had 3 green fingers on it, and whenever he thought it was an alien
on a table,
body.
Yeah.
That's kind of the weird tie-in. Now, of course, according to Farrell, the test area in Germany there, in the mine, also had ceramic bricks as a protection. So that's why the Americans, when they got the technology and possibly this device, also wanted to have a fortress of ceramic bricks for protection for their scientists because, again, a lot of German scientists had died. At least 5 of the 7 original scientists had
There's
had
2
passed away.
things for me that spring to mind when you're
Yeah.
turning this thing on. One is, first of all, how they all react in the elevator in the first Ghostbusters when they turn on the nuclear accelerator for the first time. They
Egon.
just kind of like back away from
Yeah.
it. And the other thing is that feeling you get when you go in for an x-ray for medical reasons.
Right.
And they put that thing on you and then they go and stand in another room behind a wall. You're like, well, why do you have to go over there?
Yes.
What's it doing to me?
Well, because you're getting one for the day. They're
Yeah.
seeing 12 other patients that day.
Yeah,
So
well, just remember, if you look
Yeah.
down and you're wearing a red shirt from Star Trek, you're in deep gear.
you're going to get clobbered or left behind or turned into a crystal block. So anyway, that's the wrap up. We're talking about a device that is of a research purpose, possibly some people believe for anti-gravity purposes, some think for nuclear enrichment, or just as kind of an engine.
Yes.
Yeah,
And just visually, just so you guys can start to sort of think about what it might have looked like.
Yeah, what are the dimensions?
Well, it's thought to be about 9 feet in diameter at its base and about 12 to 14 feet high. And it has a domed top. It really does look a lot like a bell with sort of a skirt on it and that comes out at the base, very similar to the shape of the Kecksburg craft.
Yes, exactly. And hence the other name for this topic and this device, Die Glocke.
Yes.
But again, pardon my German, my French, and every other language I try and attempt here, but that means the bell.
Yes.
From the start, that was the unofficial classification. I don't know if we ever received any inkling here of what it was actually officially called.
We
Yeah,
haven't.
that's
And
what I know
there's
of.
some people that speculate that it was called the Bell or that it was a mix-up between that and a saucer that the SS was developing that was also shaped much more like a bell, actually.
Right.
The only other thing I want to say about how it looked visually, there have been depictions of it online, but there's no photos of it anywhere that anyone knows of that have been released.
Nor schematics, because again, if those were captured, those would be top secret
Yeah.
by the Germans and whoever was capturing them, the U.S. or the Russians
Yeah.
at this point.
They're not popping up in a Google search anyway.
No, so
But what you will find is that a ton of people have done CGI renderings.
Yes.
And there's people who claim, it had crazy symbols around the base of it, just like the
Kecksburg
purported
craft.
Kecksburg
Yeah.
craft. But we have not read anything that said that. But I also haven't read Witkowski's book yet, which we've ordered. The English translation of his book got a lot of descriptive information in it, but it hasn't come yet because it's coming from overseas. But I haven't seen anything that suggested that it actually had weird symbols around its base.
if you're normal terrestrial human beings like us, it's for identification purposes. But I always like to go back. My often cited little tidbit of info from the CARET report, the CARET, Center for Advanced Extraterrestrial Research or something like that, where the markings, the Star Trek looking typeface, if you want to call it, is actually the code to get the device to work.
Yes.
So again, I love that idea. It's a great sci-fi idea, or maybe it's real, who knows?
What Forrest is referring to, by the way, is a famous sighting that is, I think, since thought to be a hoax.
Everything's
still kind of up in the air.
Everything's since thought to be a hoax,
Yeah.
including this, because
It's one of those
again,
ones that's too clear. The pictures are too perfect,
well,
right?
Again, it's either not clear enough or it's too clear.
Yeah.
If it's in the middle, it's not either, so it can't be believed. In this case, yes, it was a fictional scientific report about captured alien technology, which ties in with tonight's show because where this story starts are actual German military documents that were obtained.
Yeah.
They have a major incentive to be truthful because these guys are going to go up on charges at Nuremberg for crimes against humanity. So think about this. I mean, yeah, maybe they're throwing out bits of, I know something, you might not want to kill me yet. That's an angle. Or it's like, I better bargain here right away. That's also the other theory with maybe some people like Hans Kammler, who is reported to have died, but that's a little murky. But certainly with Jakob Sporenberg, he's probably going to be executed.
Yeah.
So these people are trying to make deals and bargains with the U.S. and with the Russians after Operation Paperclip, which rounded them all up, to be useful continuously and deliver some kind of goods that would keep them alive, again, like most of the NASA scientists.
Which also means that it could be prone to exaggeration. That's another thing to consider.
Absolutely.
It's like, I'm very important because this thing actually works, which
Yes.
maybe it didn't. It may have just been a failed experiment. But
No,
but if you can, to consider.
But if you can have information enough to lead them to something that is valuable, well, it's a purpose for keeping you alive, which will skirt the war crime trials at Nuremberg. So
Yes.
again, there's a lot lot of different angles on this, but we're going to operate tonight from the angle that there is some kernel of truth to this. So getting back to the symbols on the bottom.
Yes.
Again, that might have something to do with the operation of the craft or the device itself.
Yes. Speaking of ceramics, it was coated with ceramic on the outside as well.
Yeah, there's something to that.
There were tiles on it, I guess, which this reminded me of the space shuttle. They're about 3 inches thick, purportedly.
Right.
The space shuttle tiles are about 1 to 5 inches thick, which I think provide a barrier for plasma on re-entry and heat in general.
Exactly, because it just made me think of our friend Travis's barbecue, the egg, the $500 barbecue egg.
Oh, yeah.
Probably 200 pounds worth of ceramic. Ceramic aids with heat. That's the other idea, is that this thing, when kicked up, gives off a tremendous amount of heat, which may explain the nearby flytrap cooling tower.
Right.
The henge.
Right.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that operationally, this device, the Nazi bell, was thought to operate at an extremely high voltage, millions of volts.
Yeah,
required.
and Farrell believes it's impulse direct current.
Right.
Which is, slightly different, of course, than alternating current, AC. But it required a tremendous amount of power, which explains why it was being tested near the power plant.
Yes.
With lines going directly to it.
Right. And also, it's a good cover if you're
exactly.
You're
yeah. What are you doing
like
there? Why the cooling tower?
When it was on, it emitted a purple glow. And it also, according to Witkowski and others, generated a radiation that actually killed plants and ultimately some of the scientists who had been working on it, which is something we were sort of joking about there a few minutes ago. But you definitely want to be behind the wall, looking through the window.
No, exactly.
And here's the other thing. It could only be turned on very briefly. We don't know why this. Could it be because of the giant amount of power it consumed, or could it be the cooling requirements? But for whatever reason, it apparently, in its current state, at the time that people were interrogated about it, could only be operational for short periods of time.
My thinking is that it's not something you turn on and forget about, leave the room, go make yourself some microwave popcorn, because I think the field generated may just keep expanding out to a certain limit, but that might be an effect, or whatever it was doing, it was increasing and increasing to such a degree that, again, you need a limited amount of time to have this thing operating.
Exactly.
The other big part of the story is that the scientists themselves were not aware of everything that this was capable of, that they were surprised by the things they found out it could do and the things they had yet to find out it could do. So they were a little cautious about it.
Right. The last thing that we'll point out here about it descriptively is where it was located. We mentioned that it was in the Wenceslas mine, which Witkowski pointed out has all of these ravines where troops were emplaced in, I believe, concentric circles radiating out from where the bell was probably being tested.
Right.
That had possibly a couple of thousand soldiers who were armed to the teeth so that you couldn't get anywhere near there. And the interesting thing about this is we are nowhere near the war front.
And it was also connected to, as we'd mentioned previously, Der Riese, which is the giant. So this is a massive underground fortified bunker complex for storage and research purposes to keep you out of the range of bombers, which you kind of were anyway at the time. It's very controllable. It's underground. It's secret. It's next to some concentration camps, so you have a lot of free forced labor.
Right.
So there was a lot of strategic elements for this region. Here's a fun fact in what kind of minerals and mining was going on at the time. In Joachimsthal, which is now Yakimov in the Czech Republic, that had a 500-year-old silver mine there, which is where they first discovered uranium. So that was slagged off because the miners couldn't use it. They called it Pischblende, so that wasn't useful to them. Usually what that meant when they found it was that, well, this is not silver, and the silver vein, the silver seam has run out, so it was kind of bad luck. So they just made a huge heap of it, not knowing how tremendously valuable it would become. I looked up on Google Maps. I hope I've got the towns right, but it's only a 4.5-hour drive, 4 hours, 50 minutes or so, from Joachimsthal to the Wenceslas mine near Ludwikowice. That's the small town closest to this mine area.
Yes, and the other reason they put these bases or these experiments or whatever they were doing in mines is because mines were perfect pre-existing underground secret spaces that they could operate in without having to be worried about aerial photography or anything like that.
That's a whole other astonishing legends topic that a lot of other people have covered, but there's been a lot of books written about it, is secret underground bases, because that's the easiest thing to do. You go underground.
Right. And if you had the mine, you're saving yourself all that labor already.
Exactly, because that's the other problem is if you're doing something top secret and you need to get it out of sight of prying eyes and satellites, you go underground. But then what do you do with all the dirt? So now there's some crazy theories about these highly advanced tunneling machines that are thermonucleargenic and taking the dirt and heating it to such a degree that it makes glass-lined walls in tunnels. So really crazy, far-out stuff, but not certainly unheard of throughout human military secret history.
And finally, we talked about the fly trap or the hinge. And the hinge is the ring that you see that looks almost like a spider, a concrete spider on the ground, which if you look up the fly trap or you look up the bell, it's really the only picture that comes up. It's the same picture we posted to our website when we posted this episode. And some people say, oh, that's just the base of a cooling tower. But apparently there are really powerful electrical cables running to it, which a cooling tower would not need.
Right.
That doesn't explain that. And the other thing is that it's nearly identical in construction to a fly traps, which is what they call these vertical test facilities for craft that would launch vertically.
Yeah.
In addition to that, it also occurred to me today while we were preparing for this episode that if you had a cooling tower that was hollow on the inside and you had a base like that, it would also be a good way to test a device that's taking off and landing vertically without anyone seeing it.
Oh, you mean as a disguise?
Yeah.
Like this is an industrial contraption, but
Yeah.
really inside we're doing something else. That's a
Right.
very good idea. Yeah, and the reason they call it the fly trap, of course, is that it looked like a late 19th century, turn of the century there, fly trap device, which was cone-shaped that had panels. Flies would get in, they get trapped. It's kind of like a yellow jacket trap now.
Yeah, it's like a lobster trap too, isn't it? It has like a little tiny hole. They go in.
They go in and
too
they can't
dumb to get out.
Yeah, exactly. They can't find their way out. So that's why they call it the fly trap, which is a device you can see in old Sears and Roebuck's catalogs being advertised for sale. Just so you know, there's two ideas about this remaining structure, which is really the only remaining structure. That's another thing that we should probably clear up is that you can't go into the mine section because it was blown up and sealed off by the Nazis, and it would just be too cost prohibitive to dig your way in there just to see what's going on. It might be the burial section for maybe tens of thousands of Jewish prisoners.
Witkowski mentioned that the one gentleman who was also himself a prisoner who was in charge of the accounting for people that were missing had, I think,
20,000.
Go missing in 1 week or 1 day. I can't remember.
Within a day.
Yeah, within a day.
So that tells you that's how they dealt with them when they wrapped this thing up.
You wouldn't put it past the Nazis or the SS to have dealt with some of the scientists that way as well, if they had gotten to the point technologically that they had wanted to get with those people. So they might have also sealed them in there along with the labor.
Yeah, exactly. If you have the research and that's mobile, it's better not to have some people still hanging around that could give your potential enemies the same information. To the Nazis, though, the Soviets were the hated ideological enemy. They hated communism, even though they're kind of cousins ideologically. Not that they love the Americans anymore, but they hated them less than the Russians.
Right.
So during Operation Paperclip, it's like some information, I believe, was routed one way or the other.
Man, the Germans really know their engineering and machining.
Yeah, whether it's a device that can create an Einstein-Rosen bridge or a shaving razor, they sure have a way with steel. Which is probably why Jeff and Andy from Harry's bought a German razor factory with 100 years of blade-making experience, so they could make their own high-quality razors, sell them online, and ship directly to you for half the price of the leading brand.
I noticed, by the way, that you're looking cleaned up after getting rid of that Sasquatch beard.
Yeah.
Was that Harry's doing?
Of course. Well, a very smooth, close, and comfortable shave with a super sharp Harry's blade, combined with a tear in the space-time continuum. But I did not have to travel into the future to get cutting-edge shaving technology because Harry's has all that.
We're talking about a Harry's razor cartridge that has 5 German-engineered blades, a lubricating strip, a flex hinge for a comfortable glide, trimmer blade for hard-to-reach places, and all on top of a stylish, weighted, ergonomic handle.
And all that for a $2 blade compared to the $4 or more you'll pay at the drugstore or supermarket. And I didn't have to drive there and forget to buy them because Harry's comes right to my door.
Harry's really is a razor company that's fixing shaving. And now you can see for yourself and save some money because Harry's is so confident in the quality of their blades, they want you to try their most popular trial set for free.
The trial set comes with a razor handle of your choice, 5-blade cartridge, and shaving gel, and it's free when you sign up. You just pay a small fee for shipping.
So, to redeem your free trial offer, go to harrys.com/ALP right now.
That's HARRYS.com/ALP. By the way, I hear there's a German bell factory up for sale.
Hi, I'm Heather Williams, and you're listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess. Now back to the show.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is talk about the ideas of what the Bell might actually have done. We already know that Witkowski's money is on an anti-gravity propulsion device of some kind. I do want to come to that. But the way we do our show, if you've been with us a while, you already know this, is we try to start out with the simplest ideas first, or the simplest explanations first. It's Occam's razor, which says, among competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected.
What about if it's all assumptions? This is all crazy hypotheses.
Yeah, the whole thing is an assumption, really, because we don't know where this thing is.
And that is the biggest criticism against this story. We don't have any proof of any of this. There's no machinery. There's no Nazi bells sitting in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum.
Yeah.
So we have to conclude this thing didn't exist. Well, that is a route to take. And it makes the most sense. Well, I don't see any plans on the internet for this thing. I don't see any, Rebel model, plastic model that you can build like there is of the F-117 or the B-2 stealth bomber. So where is this thing? Show us the proof. Well, again, we're talking about a top secret project. So there's not going to be any of that. If there is, you'll never see it. You'll never see it. Somebody's seen it. And at least Igor swears that he saw documents, official German military documents, that showed that some kind of device existed that was baffling to not only the people reviewing these reports, but to the people experimenting with it.
And by the way, just quickly, I know that some people had some difficulty understanding Igor's accent, or might have. For me, it clicked after a few minutes, but that doesn't always work even for me. I'm not saying, I'm superior to you. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, and sometimes that just doesn't happen. So I wanted to let everybody know that we have a group of really amazing transcriptionists who have been releasing transcriptions for our patrons from the $1 level and all the way up. And we've been transcribing the episodes in stages because it costs money to get them transcribed. But Tess has a bunch in the wings now that she's releasing on Patreon. But I'm going to go ahead and select this show to be the next one to be transcribed, even though it's not chronological order. We have however many 60 shows in front of it. Yes. But we'll do this one so that people who wanted to better understand what Igor was saying will be able to read the actual interview. You just have to come over to Patreon and become a patron.
Right.
But
it costs us $1 a word to transcribe. It's not that bad. No, but it's a very handy tool. And a lot of podcasts you'll see, especially where it's dense material, you'll see that as offered as a bonus thing. So, because sometimes it's actually just easier to read it.
Yes.
Because you're not doing something else, which I often do if I listen to podcasts, like I'm jogging or something, years ago when I used to jog. And then you realize, though, that you're missing a lot of it. So I totally get it when you get to the end of it. It's like, what the heck were they talking about? I still have no idea.
Yeah.
What was this thing? This transcript will help plot out what Igor was saying, because he is the source, really, the seminal source for all this information.
Yes.
From which everybody's written their books and done their research. He let the popular world know about it.
Exactly. All right. So just wanted to let you know that. And Sarah, I'll be in touch with you about getting that transcript going. If I haven't emailed you already, you can go for it and send us the bill. Okay. So getting back, we were talking about how we were going to try to take a look at the more mundane explanations early on. And then as we progress through our theories, we get to the more what you might call crazier ones.
Yes.
Crazier just because they rely on more assumptions.
Right.
That's fun. We like to do that. You know how this works. When you get into the crazy stuff, that's when you get to talk about things like UFO disco wizards and that sort of thing.
Again, that's the fun thing. We're not a debunking show, which to us is a valuable thing to add to the discourse, but a lot less fun.
Yeah. A lot less fun for us and our listeners. We're betting. So let's say that the Nazi bell had something to do with the bomb, as they would say.
The A-bomb, the atom bomb?
The atom bomb.
Okay.
Or a nuclear weapon, developing a way to create a nuclear weapon.
Yes, using molecular technology and newly discovered science, because that's all in the ballpark here, since the turn of the century.
Yes.
So then we're only really talking about 40 years since people like Marie and Pierre Curie were experimenting with radium, and people like Ernest Rutherford and Frederick Soddy, who were discovering that uranium actually gives off energy, radiation, and the proof of Einstein's E = mc² theory. So this is the whole birth of this kind of science coming into play, which heretofore had not been discovered or known about.
That's right. And if you have to think about what would have been Nazi Germany's goal, what would be anyone's goal, any country's goal in war, it's to win the war as decisively and as quickly as possible. So
Same thing about martial arts. You don't sit there and have a sparring match for 20 minutes. You're there to put the guy down.
Exactly. So the question is, how do you do that? Well, you do it through superior firepower and weaponry, or strategy. You could also use that. But they were probably looking for delivery systems. And when it comes to the Bell as a possible delivery system, based on the explanations that we've read, there's some that would suggest that maybe it's just a physical delivery system. And there's other ones that might suggest that it actually does what is tantamount to magic, where you
Right.
open a hole in space and time and you throw a bomb through it and close it back up.
Yesterday. It gets there the day
exactly.
before.
And
sure.
it gets there the day before.
Yeah.
So the weaponry itself, more specifically a nuclear weapon, the bomb is probably the first thing that we need to think about this. And what a bomb requires is uranium,
Yes.
the rock that became a bomb. And I'm so bummed I couldn't find this again, but somewhere in our research,
Yeah.
and I'd read something about uranium and its origins as being left over from an exploding star.
Well, a supernova. Yeah.
A supernova. And I love the idea of that, because what it's saying is that because that is what it is, as an element, it harbors the most energy of anything you can find on the
Yeah.
planet.
So are we. All the minerals you find in your own body and in uranium, which crackles with the power and the energy of this unimaginable explosion, this cosmic event, all these elements come from that. That's what formed the Earth. Uranium was a product of that supernova explosion. It gets embedded into the dirt of the Earth. As the Earth cools, now it's gelled in there. But yeah, that's, Moby. We're all made of stars.
Yes.
That's what he's talking about.
Yes. Well, uranium is obviously very hard to find. It's very rare on the Earth. And the uranium that you need, at least at the time, would have been uranium-235. Or also, in the early days, they were working with uranium-233. Now, you mentioned earlier Czechoslovakia, and there was a relationship to Germany and Czechoslovakia and their uranium mine there. Can you go back over that real quick?
Yeah. In Joachimsthal, which is where the 500-year-old silver mine is, that's where they discover uranium as a rock, but it wasn't known as that then. What the town was doing, what they were famous for, was making Joachimsthalers, which is a big silver coin, which is where we get the term dollar from.
Oh,
Nobody
there
knew
you go.
that. Yeah.
Learn something new every day.
When they came across this Pischblende, they threw it away because they didn't know what it was. But to give you an idea of just how valuable it became, in 1908, gold is 66 cents per gram, while a gram of radium, a derivative of this iron uranium ore, is worth $88,000.
Right.
So like anything else, like helium-3 or one of these rare elements, it becomes very expensive because it is so rare. And reportedly, this is the only place in all of Europe that it is found.
At the time.
Yes, at the time. So this mine was very important to whom? The Nazis, who on March 14th, 1939, break their pledge that Hitler made in Munich not to do any more bad stuff, and he takes over all the rest of Czechoslovakia. So now they own the mine. They occupy this territory, so they have within their grasp uranium.
Right. So
which makes a lot of people worried.
So one of the things, though, that they might have also been trying to do with the Bell, coming back to the Bell, is trying to find ways to enrich or breed uranium through particle acceleration or cyclotron type of action. And we're going to talk about that in a second. The other way that you win the war with the bomb is something that we talked about a few minutes ago, is make the bomb tiny. If you can make it really small, that vastly improves your ability to conceal and deliver it. It reduces all the requirements associated with deploying the weapon.
That's another huge part of this story, in that the Germans, even if they had the bomb, you still got to get it to another area far away from your own country. So who are they at war with? Well, Russia. Then somehow you got to transport it to the Eastern Front. Now, some people believe, like Joseph Farrell, that the Nazis actually did test and have a working prototype of some sort of atomic weapon device. Maybe not the full bomb, but they had actually tested it on the Russians, again, their natural ideological enemy that they hated the most, somewhere on the Eastern Front. And that you didn't really hear about it from the Russians because it would have upset the power structure there, especially with Stalin, and that it would have caused a lot of doubt, all this kind of chaos. I don't know about that aspect of it. But he's thinking, though, that they were in the process of experimenting with it, used maybe some kind of a dirty bomb device even,
Right.
something like that, something that was lethal that killed a lot of soldiers. So that had already been done. But if you're at war with the United States, you need a method of getting this big bomb, and you can either do it through a rocket. So their V-2 rocket program was not capable enough to deliver something that heavy, that huge distance. They couldn't reach the range. But you could get it there by plane, because we certainly did in Hiroshima.
Right. So coming back to the Bell and how the Bell might have been involved in this process, acquiring the uranium, it gets really dense, no pun intended, but
it's fascinating. The whole story of uranium is fascinating, as we pointed out in that documentary, Uranium Twisting the Dragon's Tail, which was a Australian-produced documentary aired on PBS. And we will have a link to it. I think that's still for free, at least in this one link on Daily Motion. So we'll provide it. It's worth a watch, or you can buy it on iTunes like I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I took a bunch of notes, but it explains very elegantly and simply the whole history of uranium and why it has changed the world.
Right. So one of the things is that the naturally occurring uranium that you find in the Earth is not weapons grade. It is only 0.07%, I believe.
Yeah, most of the uranium ore that's pulled out from the ground is uranium-238, which means the nucleus contains 238 protons and neutrons. And when you pull it out of the ground, fewer than 1 in 100 nuclei of uranium is uranium-235, which has 3 fewer neutrons in it, which is what you need to make it the most splittable.
Right. And you can also apparently use uranium-233 to create a weapon as well. And here's the interesting thing. This is how it comes back to the Bell. There are people who will tell you that the Bell was a particle accelerator that was designed to breed uranium-233 by bombarding an element known as thorium-232 with neutrons. So the way that this thing supposedly would have worked is you would have had the thorium-232, you turn on the particle accelerator, it bombards it with neutrons and actually creates protactinium-233.
One of the granddaughters of uranium.
Yeah, so bear with us here. The protactinium-233 will naturally degrade into weapons-grade uranium-233 in just 27 days. I'm just going to sum that up again because it took me a while to wrap my head around this. Thorium is 3 to 5 times more abundant in nature than uranium. It's all around. And in fact, there's a thorium mine near the Wenceslas mine where the Bell was. So you're not going to have a problem getting thorium. So you take the thorium, you take it, you put it in the Bell, however that works. I'm sure there's it's like the back of the Back to the Future
the
car.
gas tank.
Fusion.
You have to look on which side of is it on the right, or the driver's side, or the
you open it up,
side?
You dump in the thorium.
Yeah, you don't want to back up to the pump the wrong way.
We're reaching the limits of our understanding. But you put the thorium in there, you turn this thing on, it creates protactinium, and then you take the protactinium, and if you wait less than 30 days, you have weapons-grade uranium-233. However, 233 is not the most desired version of uranium for weapons, but I'm not sure they knew that at that time. 235 is better. But what this does is it provides them an ability to have an endless supply of fuel that they can create for these weapons and get it going in less than 30 days as long as they have access to a thorium mine.
Right. See, that's one of the 3, agreed upon purposes for this Bell device. One, Germany needs its own power supply. It cannot be dependent on oil from other countries. As we said before in the book, The Formula, they were working on a way to make synthetic oil. So then you don't need to rely on crude oil shipments from other countries, which that's very unstable. 2 is that this could also be a major weapon, a mega weapon, a Nazi mega weapon. Which we notice here is that, and you probably notice yourself out there in the audience, is that nuclear power and nuclear weapons, very small difference between one of the two. One's a controlled reaction that you can create, heat and steam from and generate electricity with. The other one you set off. It causes a cascading chain reaction that can wipe out whole cities.
Right.
The third possible, and depends on how your logic lies in this crazy discussion, the third thing is some kind of anti-gravity, zero-point energy field propulsion device. Say that 7 times fast. And that would also be an engine of some kind. So those are the 3 most bandied about ideas for this Bell device.
Right. So I spoke with our resident scientist over at the Astonishing Research Corps, Chris Cogswell, who is a chemical engineer. He's not a nuclear scientist, but he understands this stuff pretty well. And I was asking him about these questions about this possibility of the Bell being this device that was breeding protactinium from thorium to have it degrade into uranium. And I also asked him about uranium-233 versus 235, because 235 is the targeted isotope of uranium that they're looking for these days. He said that 233 is not as usable in weapons as uranium-235 or plutonium, because it can also create uranium-232, which releases what he called a comical amount of gamma radiation that makes it almost impossible to work with safely. Yeah. I asked him what exactly a comical amount of gamma radiation was, and he said, it's like a melt your skin amount.
So you mean comical, not in the turning into the Hulk fashion?
No, more comical opening the arc fashion.
Somebody in the arc, and you're that Nazi who gets his face melted.
Yeah. He pointed out pretty quickly there that only 5 bombs have ever been tested with uranium-233. 235 is the targeted isotope of uranium that you want to have. So what they were doing here, he said, may have been at the time in pursuit, and this is just a theory that some people have posited online, pursuing something that's completely plausible, this idea that they could make this 233 and then make the bombs from the uranium-233. And they might have thought that would work because they didn't understand the dangers of working with it until it was too late.
Right.
So for us internally, for the Astonishing Legends and the Astonishing Research Corps, while this is an interesting idea of this device, it does not seem like something that would have functioned.
No, but you're in the ballpark. That's also what I got from Chris Cogswell's inklings, his thoughts on the matter was that, well, of all these crazy beryllium peroxides and your red mercuries and you got your Lichtmetals and all these exotic things like 525.
Which is supposedly what fueled the Bell.
Right, exactly. So, code name for something else because it's serum 5, what does that mean? Is that the address of the mine? Why is it? There's an old post-production place here called 525.
Well, that was for the number of scan lines and NTSC video stream.
Exactly, right. So it means something. People don't just pick out names. It usually means something. So what he was surmising was that, well, you're in the ballpark with, of course, nuclear research in the areas of energy production and weaponry. But who knows exactly, because again, these are very fine lines. This is very dangerous work to begin with. Who knows exactly what they were doing? Now, what I will say in this area that I think a lot of the people that have studied this field and have written books about it, I think most believe that their atomic research and the Bell research were two separate things. And that the atomic research for energy production, their normal atomic bomb research, was not even classified as high as the Bell research, which was Kriegentscheidend. So that was war decisive, which means, okay, we got our atomic bomb research going on over here. That's very promising. That could blow up whole cities like Stalingrad. On the other hand, this thing could wipe out a whole nation and send them back into the Stone Age, literally. Who knows? Or this thing could power a fleet of flying saucers to go to Antarctica or the moon.
Okay, so before we move on, we did want to take a moment to spend some time on one of our patented tangents. And I think it's a worthwhile tangent.
Did you remember to file a patent for that? The patent office in Bern, Switzerland?
Yeah, the patent's pending.
Okay.
You can't talk about all this stuff and about uranium and truly understanding the idea of the Bell and how the Bell might have contributed to uranium enrichment. We had to do a lot of reading. A lot of times the research we do is more so we can figure out what not to say than it is what to say.
We just usually forget stuff to say.
Well, we have to be careful.
Ourselves.
We have to be careful. We have all those emails that come in and, actually mispronounced biscuit. So I just want to be clear on this centrifuge discussion. We are in no way experts nor claiming to be experts on it. But here's the interesting thing about how centrifuges get involved in enriching uranium for nuclear weapons.
You want to explain a little bit why you have to enrich?
Yes.
Or did we say that
Well,
already?
what happens is when you mine the uranium, it's like you said, you mine these huge quantities of uranium.
Right.
But what comes out of the ground is the 238, and what you want is the uranium-235, and less than 1% of the uranium that is mined is 235.
Yeah, mostly what comes out of the ground is U-238. Now, here's a little explainer, which again, tangent upon diversion here. This is a little fun factoid that I had forgotten about, and it's always nice to be reminded again from school. What differentiates one element from another, like helium between oxygen and carbon, is the number of protons inside each nucleus. So hydrogen, the most plentiful atom in the universe, 1 proton. An atom with 2 protons is helium. An atom with 6 protons is carbon. Gold has 79 protons. So when you change the number of protons, or when an element does, naturally, which is pretty rare, uranium does that by itself, gives off energy, it changes into something else. So when Scott says that uranium changes into thorium, into protactinium, to radium and radon and blah, 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 and so forth, 14 times, it is actually becoming a brand new element. So when we say uranium-235, it's because that is the number of protons and neutrons added together. And so the uranium nucleus has a whopping 92 protons and usually 146 neutrons. And that can vary. So that is a large, large nucleus. I think the biggest on Earth that we know of. So because it's so large, it strains under its own weight, held together by the strong nuclear force, the strongest force in the universe. And that makes it unstable. It is straining and bulging. And now when you upset that, if you shoot a proton into that nucleus, it tips the scale. It knocks it off balance. It gives off energy. It throws off chunks of itself. And that is radiation. And that is what Rutherford and Soddy had discovered, that it does this naturally. No one had ever known that before.
Right.
And that's what radiation is. It's giving off chunks. And so that is the seeding here, the idea for a nuclear bomb. Continuing on from this, the idea for an atom bomb actually comes from not a physicist or a chemist, but a novelist, H.G. Wells, when he wrote the book, The World Set Free. He dedicates that book to Frederick Soddy, who was one of the two guys who, along with Ernest Rutherford, discovered that radiation comes off of the uranium nucleus when it naturally spits off chunks of itself. Now, who gets the idea for this? While stopping in a street corner for our London listeners, Southampton Row in Russell Square. He gets the idea of like, wait, well, what would you need to create this atom bomb that I read about in H.G. Wells' novel, The World Set Free? How would you trigger that? Well, you manipulate the atom. If you are able to affect this instability within the uranium atom, that is, these protons leaving the uranium nucleus are giving off energy in the form of radiation. If that strikes another nucleus, that will start a cascading chain reaction, hitting 2 hit 4 hit 8, 16, and within 60 steps, you have a quintillion atoms releasing energy.
Right, and you have to have a certain amount to start with to get this to work, and that's called the critical mass, and
it's
not the bike ride.
The topless bike ride. Yeah. No,
they weren't topless when I did them in New York.
Oh, you missed out, man. Well, it's cold there, too.
No, people hated it. I did it once.
Nobody wanted to see you topless with electrical tape
I
on your
wasn't
nipples.
topless.
Oh, you see. Okay, well, that's a different story.
Yeah.
But that's what Leo Zillard, this Hungarian physicist, realized standing on the street corner is like, it can be done.
What Forrest has just described is a chain reaction. So what's happening is you have critical mass, which is a certain number of these atoms.
Yes.
Reacting together, which all you have to do is get that first group of critical mass to explode into the other ones around them and keep going. And once they get past 60 steps, you have a nuclear explosion.
That's called fission.
Yeah.
So usually in a thermonuclear device, you have a core of this uranium or plutonium in a ball. You need a evenly explosive charge around the whole thing to compress the atoms.
Perfectly.
Yes. So you have a primary stage and a secondary stage. That's where the talk of all this red mercury comes in, that maybe that's a cheaper, much, much smaller way to do that. So you could have a suitcase pocket or softball nuke to great effect, or create kind of a neutron bomb with that. Now, if you look at the Trinity site where they did the first nuclear test explosion, they rigged a 100-foot tall scaffolding, this tower, to loft a massive ball. I think this is maybe 6-8 feet wide in diameter. And I believe it was TNT. They spread evenly around. You have to detonate it all at once perfectly, so it creates this compression. That releases the secondary stage of the explosion, and then you have this cascading chain reaction. So Leo Zillard, again, one of the Hungarian physicists and a Jew, had left Europe because of Hitler, gone to London, gets this idea of like, there's a brilliant chemist named Otto Hahn. And just so you know, yes, chemistry and physics go hand in hand. They often overlap. But he was a student of Ernest Rutherford's at the time they made their discovery. And what Otto Hahn did is that he was the first to split the atom of uranium. when we say splitting the atom, what you really mean is splitting the nucleus. So he had some puzzling results that he wasn't sure, what's going on here with this very strange reactions. He sends his results to his Jewish colleague, Lise Meitner, who's also a physicist, and she had also fled Germany. And she figured out what he had done. And he split the uranium atom, something nobody had thought possible prior to that. So Leo Zillard is very worried because now Germany has the knowledge to do this, to create this splitting of the uranium atom, and they have the uranium fuel to do it within the mine at Joachimsthal. They got all the materials.
Okay, but this uranium that is in the mines and that occurs naturally is
Right.
primarily, by an overwhelming majority, over 99%, uranium-238, and they need it to be 235. So
Exactly.
how do they enrich it?
I'm going to tell you exactly the steps so you at home can make your own atom bomb. But that's the idea, is that what they have to do then is, like we said before, 1 out of 100 uranium atoms is this uranium-235, which is what you need, not the U-238. So you have to individually mine and process these atoms. Think about that, on an industrial scale, which is what the United States did. Because you think in this very short period of time, the U.S., with the help of the captured German scientists from Operation Paperclip, were able to do this using their knowledge for the last push. What we know at the end of it was that, of course, the Germans get captured, Russia invades, Hitler supposedly kills himself in the Führer bunker, and it turns out they really didn't have a bomb. Now, that is not to say they weren't working on something. And again, you wouldn't know that because that might still be classified information about how far they got, because guess what? We got our share of that. The Russians got the other share. And according to some, in John Ventry, we didn't even get the best scientists.
Right.
We got really good ones. Werner von Braun, Otto Cerny, they figured out how to get our rocketry program
Ventry
going.
described von Braun as mid-level.
A bench warmer, maybe.
Yeah. Who was it that the Russians got? Then passed away at the age of 61. So
Yes.
they got the smarter guy, but he didn't last as long.
Well, there you go. You go for the long haul
Yeah.
because, again, look at what we're able to accomplish. But here's an interesting tidbit that when we say that the U.S. got going, you know how that happened? Well, Leo Zillard is in London. He is now very worried. He is thinking that the Germans now have the uranium material from the Joachimsthal mine, the Pischblende. They have the knowledge within Otto Hahn of being able to split the atom. Well, he is not famous enough as a chemist or physicist or scientist in general to get the attention of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States. But he does know somebody who happens to be the most famous scientist in the world at that point, Albert Einstein, who had also fled Europe and is now renting a summer home in Long Island. And Leo Zillard meets with Einstein in person and tells him about this idea. Now, Einstein had never really thought about this before, but now he does, and now he realizes, ooh, the Nazis with a nuclear device, this is bad. So on August 2nd, 1939, he drafts a letter to FDR, which does get his attention, saying like, hey, this is bad news. So we better start doing something about this, warning him that the Nazis are probably working on a uranium bomb. And so Roosevelt now orders that research begin on making our own American uranium bomb, and he gives the green light to the Army Corps of Engineers, handled out of the Manhattan District, and it becomes known as the Manhattan Project. So there you go. Yeah.
So this tracks all of it.
But getting back to your question, how do they enrich it? Don't exactly know, but I know why they have to, because again, as we said, uranium-238 is not the form of the uranium atom that you want. You want 235. So 3 neutrons lighter is a infinitesimally small amount, but it is an amount that they can exploit. That's what enrichment means. You are getting U-238 to become U-235. You are enriching it, which is a difficult process. Think about it. You're mining and processing atoms.
Right. And there's a couple of different ways to do this.
There's a couple of different ways, but think about it in connection to the Bell. What is one of the main things that the Bell is said to have done?
Spin.
At a
Internally.
At a very high rate of speed, which is what you need.
Right.
Now, I personally don't think that is maybe what they were doing, that the counter-rotating cylinders with the strange material may have an electromagnetic effect.
With a centrifuge type device, you wouldn't need counter rotation.
Exactly. I don't believe so. You don't
I'm
need
not
counter
saying
rotation.
that categorically because I don't know.
Right, but they're not doing it to be efficient or anything.
Yeah.
I think it has a different purpose. And again, I'm of the belief that the atomic program and the Bell program were separate, related very closely, maybe even shared some knowledge between Walter Gerlach, who is, I think, the head scientist supposedly on the Bell,
Yes.
and Otto Hahn.
And here's the other interesting thing. I think we mentioned this in part 1, but it bears repeating. The Bell's location and the building that it was housed in were over a shaft at the Wenceslas mine known as the Walter Shaft.
There you go. That's
And
not
it
a
was-
name either.
and it was
It's
a newer
a mine shaft, yeah.
Yeah, it was a newer shaft as
Yeah.
well. So it's possible it was named for him, another indication that the Bell was definitely there.
The shaft had been enlarged at the opening and refurbished in a way. Why would you need to do that unless you're moving something very large into the space?
Before we get off of this, I do want to talk about centrifuges real quick because I don't know another time we're going to have to be able to talk about this next little bit, which I
Right.
think this is something really interesting. Some of our listeners may be familiar with a malicious software bug known as Stuxnet. Since we're here, I wanted to talk a little bit about how a centrifuge works and how it enriches uranium. Just a very brief overview of it. They find that it's easier to undergo the enrichment process by introducing acid that turns the uranium into a gas. They
Yes.
take this gas and they put it into a centrifuge and they spin it. And they spin it real fast. It has to go up to 100,000 revolutions per minute.
Yeah.
And when they do this, the uranium-238, which is not weapons grade, and the 235 separate from each other because they are infinitesimally different in weight.
Yes.
The 235 moves to the center of the centrifuge, and the 238 moves to the outside. But you have to spin a long, long time, and then you do this, and then you remove the gas at the middle, and you have a higher concentration of the 235. Then you stick it in another centrifuge, and you do it again. And you do it over and over, and it takes a
Right.
long, long time.
Yes.
And the centrifuges have to be perfect. They have to rotate at the right speed. This
You
is
need a
why
lot of power, and you need it consistent, and you need it even.
this is why it takes developing countries a long time to develop weapons grade uranium because of these centrifuges. This is a high-tech situation. So it's not clear who did this. There are some theories that it was a joint American and Israeli operation, but this brilliant worm was created called Stuxnet. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to any tech news or that kind of thing, but maybe you've heard of the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is the new deal now. If you have a smart house, and that's on the consumer level, or at the industrial level, you have a hydroelectric dam that everything is controlled by the Internet, and then you have these controllers and equipment that control this industrial level equipment, whether it's a wastewater plant or whatever. And a lot of that equipment is controlled via Microsoft Windows and controllers that are built by Siemens, the German company.
Oh,
Yes,
tell you.
yeah,
Yes.
been around for a
Next
long
step
time.
is the Terminator.
Yeah.
That's how you get there.
So what they did was, whether it was the Israelis or the Americans or somebody else or a joint operation, they took this worm.
It's
that-
diabolically ingenious.
It really is, because they took it and they needed to get it into a completely isolated system in Iran, where Iran was trying to enrich uranium, and their system was not connected to the outside internet in any way. So
But
they
you don't need that.
Right. They took it and put it on a USB drive, like a thumb drive or a flash drive. I guess, I don't know, left it laying on somebody's desk.
I don't even think you have
We
to
don't
do
really
that.
know exactly.
No, but
Right.
here's the point of that. These are very smart guys, the top of their field. You want to keep this facility sealed off from outside prying eyes and malicious viruses and worms, so guys are not inside the facility surfing the web. It's totally isolated. And so you have a problem if you're trying to introduce this malicious worm. How do you get it in there? Well, you don't try and hack your way in. That's too difficult, trying to hack passwords and such. You use the human element, which is always fallible. Human
Right.
beings will always shoot themselves in the foot. Like you said, how do you get it in there? If you leave it on a drive, all you have to do is you write on the outside company salaries on it.
Right.
That's all you have to do. You maybe even have to not label it. How many people are curious? You see, oh, here's a jump drive at the local Starbucks here in Tehran. Like, I wonder what's on this thing.
Right.
Somebody picks that up. They plug it into their laptop, which they use at the facility, or they take it into the facility themselves. They plug it in, and boom, it's done. The Trojan horse
And
is
it's not
been
one
unloaded.
drive. All you got to do is drop one on the floor at every internet cafe in the area.
Yeah.
You don't
just
even need
one
anyone on
person.
the inside.
That's the thing. A human being, like a rat going into a ship carrying the plague, that's all you need. It's now inside. So you've gotten through that one barrier, and then the worm does the rest.
So here comes the part about the worm and all the stuff that we hope, if you've been taking notes, kids, And like we said, this episode might not have been the one to be doing a workout. Because this is kind of intense. Of course, we have a lot that are intense.
And the idea is it's actually pretty simple. The steps are ingenious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what this thing was designed to do was attack the Iranian centrifuges. Because that process that takes years and years, and the enriching and the spinning, and then take it out and spin it again and keep spinning it, and all that stuff is controlled by the Siemens controllers and the Microsoft Word. And all they have to do is just change the speed on those centrifuges a little bit.
That's why we said it's such a precise method, and it has to be exact, or
Right.
you don't get the desired result, and you're set back years.
And that's what they did. But then here's the other brilliant thing. The worm not only altered the speed of the centrifuges, it covered it, it masked its trail so that in the analysis of the controllers and the looking at the reports and all the feedback, everything was right on track.
Yes, it sent back reports that everything was A-OK and groovy, and you're right on track when it really wasn't. So you don't even know to look for a problem.
And it's still kind of a failure because ideally they wouldn't have caught it. It was designed to make itself go away. And then they would have had to wonder why their enrichment program wasn't working. But apparently they caught it in the act. And as a result, they were able to say, oh.
But apparently, though, it did put them behind.
It definitely put them behind.
It bought us,
but not as behind as they would have been if they hadn't have caught it.
Right.
That's what Stuxnet did. That shows you how important centrifuges is. And this tangent comes back around for us because it explains how the idea of the Bell somehow being involved in enriching uranium to make weapons-grade material is a plausible idea. And it would have been, even if it had been doing the breeder reactor situation that we had talked about, that Chris Cogswell said the byproducts of would have been very bad. The idea of that still would have been way ahead of its time at that point, as far as we can tell.
Yeah.
So whatever was going on there, that is the one theory about what the Bell was. For everybody who's, what is the Bell? You haven't said. This is one of the major theories, was that somehow it was involved in making that happen.
Nuclear energy generation.
You know, doing all this research on the Bell has made me want to go back and really dive into World War II history. I mean, we're looking at some of the far-out alternative twists, but the broader story really puts those theories into context.
I know what you mean. It's reminding me of how much I've forgotten since school. But with the Great Courses Plus, it's like having the best colleges come to you, while avoiding the massive tuition and student loan debt.
And you get taught by some of the best award-winning professors and experts in the field. You can try it out now with a full month of free, unlimited video courses when you sign up using our special URL, thegreatcoursesplus.com/legends.
They have over 8,000 lectures available, and they're adding more all the time. They have courses on your traditional subjects like history and science, but each lecture has its own fascinating angle. And then there's topics like world travel, a wine tasting toolkit, gardening and grilling. Learn skills that can improve your life.
Grilling and picking the right wines I could definitely use some help with, but I'm still enjoying learning about those mysterious Etruscans.
Right, so which lecture are you on now?
Etruscan myths, legends, and heroes.
Ah, of course. So tell us about an Etruscan legend.
Okay, well, the most important story in Etruscan mythology is the legend of Tages. I think I know where Star Trek's getting its character name from.
Right.
Tarkhan is out plowing his field when an infant pops up out of the ground, and this baby named Tages looks like an old man with wrinkles, teeth, and male pattern baldness. Tages then dictates all of the divination practices and key religious rituals before either disappearing, dying, or I guess being carried home by Tarkhan.
Aha! More autochthony with the legend of baby Charlie Brown, or maybe Benjamin Button, I guess.
Those are both great legends, but no. Learn about the real legends during your first free month just by signing up through our special URL, thegreatcoursesplus.com/legends.
And you can stream all of this fascinating knowledge from your smartphone, tablet, laptop, or TV. Start on one device and pick up from any other.
We know you're going to love it like we do, so don't wait. Get your free month by signing up today at thegreatcoursesplus.com/legends.
That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/legends.
I'm Jose Garcia Chow, and this is Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, this could have gone at the end, but I wanted to put it in the middle here because it segues nicely into our next topic, and that's just the idea of disinformation. I'm sure we have a lot of listeners that are all about disinformation and understand what it is, but for others that don't, that are less conspiratorial in their nature, it's just the idea of sophisticated propaganda designed to mask what's really going on.
It's done for several purposes. Either you put out a piece of disinformation to throw people off the trail of the real information, or you put it out there to see who bites, because spies will do that.
Right.
If you're trying to flesh out a mole in your organization, you put out some disinformation, you see if that disinformation gets spread, then you know who did it.
Exactly. It's going to come up again as we're talking about the bell, and it's going to come up anytime we're talking about anything kind of conspiratorial or missing or mysterious. And governments around the world excel at disinformation. It makes total sense as a viable defense against rogue powers acquiring knowledge of this type. So you can see the inherent value of CIA operatives, for example, being placed in the research community to make strong claims that the bell is some kind of far-out fantastic but completely unbuildable device for anti-gravity propulsion or time travel, because these are claims that if you're a skeptic are easily dismissed, in which case you might dismiss the entire idea of the bell. Or conversely, they are claims that if you try to replicate, they may be impossible to replicate, whether they're true or not, because of the high state of technology. And the more time and resources you put into it, the less time and resources you have to pursue the idea of, say, I don't know, quickly creating bomb-grade uranium. Now, because of disinformation, when it comes to global superpowers and war, we can never know for sure if what we're talking about is real. Which brings us to another one of our well-thought-out tangents, although this one is more organic than the Centrifuge one, I think. This is a real red flag for debunkers,
Right.
Pun intended, and that is red Mercury.
Yes, begin rolling your eyeballs.
I'm pretty sure that red Mercury was featured prominently in at least one of the Die Hard movies. Wasn't there a liquid bomb with
It's in for everything.
They put red fluid in it?
Yes, you have to have a tube with red liquid in it and blue liquid, and then
Mixing
the device
together.
mixes together and kaboom. But it's been featured in so many comic books, video games, everything. And this is what I told Scott, and he had a great reply to it that I loved. We were talking about it over lunch, and I said, well, it stands for a bunch of different things in my opinion. It's the boogeyman. I said, what does the boogeyman stand for you?
Everything you're afraid of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a name that covers so much.
It does, and it's interesting, and we like to talk about it because this is what we do the show, is it's fun. We want to talk about the directly rational stuff, but we also want to talk a little bit about the more irrational stuff, because when you talk about it, you learn more about it, and you, again, can make your own decision about whether or not red Mercury is real.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to say it like that. But so red Mercury has been attributed with a variety of what you might almost call magical powers, coming in such forms as hot red Mercury and cold red Mercury, with 1 liter of this liquid costing $1 million.
Wow.
Also, here's another way that you can test to see if your red Mercury is real.
Yeah.
You can take some of it and put it on a plate, and if there's garlic on the plate, and it moves away from the garlic, you know it's repelled by garlic. It's real. And then but you know what it's attracted to?
Yeah.
Gold.
Well, yeah. So it's vampiric, greedy red Mercury.
Greedy red Mercury. Now, arms experts the world over who supply terrorists with the things they need to wage their horrible terror campaigns apparently have long lists of details about what real red Mercury will and won't do. Another thing that they will tell you is that it comes in a small container that, if opened incorrectly, can flatten an 8-kilometer radius.
Oh my gosh. So push down while twisting.
Yeah, exactly. You really want to get that one right. Now,
Yeah.
in November of 2015, and you guys may have heard about this, is kind of a famous story if you follow any kind of spy stuff, or which I love this kind of news. I'm always reading about spy things.
Yes.
Journalist C.J. Chiver, could be Chiver, I'm not sure, it's Chiver, wrote an article in the New York Times called The Doomsday Scam, which is the most thorough article on this. In this article, he writes of an effort by an ISIS terrorist, or a supplier for ISIS, to acquire red Mercury on behalf of the Islamic State. And in the article, this is one of my favorite descriptions of it. It comes straight out of the article. Precious and rare, exceptionally dangerous and exorbitantly expensive, its properties unmatched by any compound known to science. It was the stuff of doomsday dreams. According to well-traveled tales of its potency, when detonated in combination with conventional high explosives, red Mercury could create the city-flattening blast of a nuclear bomb. In another application, a famous nuclear scientist once suggested it could be used as a component in a neutron bomb small enough to fit in a sandwich-sized paper bag.
Oh, that's convenient.
According to the International Atomic Energy Authority, red Mercury is, quote, a bunch of malarkey, end quote. So what's happening here? These terror organizations are spending millions of dollars, or were anyway, they might have gotten wise, undertaking great effort to get this supposedly mythical substance.
Well, you don't want to be Doc Brown ripping off the terrorists because they come after you.
Yes.
Then you have to go back in time.
They found me.
Yeah.
I don't know how. This is where I'm going to come back to the disinformation point and why I wanted to put it in front of this. Debunkers get crazy with conspiracy theorists because they continue to self-confirm their conspiracies. They just, anything you say that disproves it, there's a phrase for this, and I don't feel like looking it up right now, but anything you say that disproves it, they just say, well, you can't, that doesn't count, Yeah. So there's a little bit of that going on here, but if some form of red mercury is real, the next thing that I think about is the usual suspects. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. I know we've quoted that a lot. It's one of the best quotes ever. But my point is,
said near the Count of Saint Germain. So there's another time.
Yeah, right. Said near Kevin Pollak.
Yes, that was Kaiser Sose being interviewed.
Yes, that was Kaiser being interviewed. But the point is, if it is a real substance, then the best thing you can do is convince people that it's not. On the other hand, the CIA and the world powers who are concerned about terrorist powers seem to be okay with the fact that they're trying to acquire it, which does lead you to believe that it probably isn't real or it's impossible to attain or create.
It's everything. It goes both ways. It doesn't exist, and it does exist if you're trying to buy it. We'll take your money and arrest you. But for the rest of you, it doesn't exist. Don't worry about it. Dual purpose.
Didn't you tell me last week, though, that there was a prominent professor who stated that red mercury was real?
Well, in the article you just suggested here, which you quoted, in another application, a famous nuclear scientist once suggested it could be used as a component in a neutron bomb small enough to fit in a sandwich-size paper bag.
Right, that I just quoted.
Yes, that famous nuclear scientist is Samuel T. Cohen. Samuel T. Cohen is not just a guy writing cheap paperbacks to try and make a buck. He is the father of the neutron bomb. To simplify that, remember the description on that one? That is the bomb that leaves the building standings and kills everyone else and kills all the people. So originally he developed that as a method to possibly confront the massive Soviet buildup of a humongous amount of troops in Eastern Europe, possibly advancing towards Western Europe, which they did not want. But you're now using nuclear weapons around friendly countries like Germany. How do you keep from flattening Germany literally into a glowing mess, but get rid of the advancing Russian army? Well, you do that with a neutron bomb, which is basically bombarding them with massive amounts of neutron radiation, protons being thrown at them, which can penetrate their armor. Again, even if you have a mass of Russian tanks advancing, you still get to kill all the people, but leave the buildings, your German friends' buildings standing. So Samuel T. Cohen, though, was a firm believer in red mercury as a powerful explosive-like chemical that he called a ballotechnic. That is a chemical nuclear component that generates a tremendous amount of heat, but not a lot of mass exchange, so there's not a huge explosion. So that counters the idea, though, of using it to create a small nuclear weapon device. The big worry here that he had was that now you could have something the size of a cantaloupe or grapefruit that is a nuclear bomb, very hard to detect, especially on the world nuclear black market trade in these kind of things. Saddam Hussein personally bought 10 of them. There was 50 created by Russian scientists. So this is a weird problem here because this guy's no slouch.
Right.
He knows what he's talking about. You might be a chemist out there, but did you create the neutron bomb? On the other hand, obviously he might be a little eccentric in his beliefs. But you know who else was another eccentric scientist? Albert Einstein, with the hair and the pipe and the wearing of the sweatshirts every day. He would also be considered kind of eccentric. So there you have the problem, is that you have a very credible source, and by others, not a very credible source, but not in the subject, only on this particular point that he believed red mercury existed. Now, as a substance itself, that's my point where I kind of make a departure, is that there might be a manufactured substance that is red mercury or not, or something similar, but it's not red, it has nothing to do with mercury, but it has the same effect. Now, he claimed a red mercury bomb would require no fissile material, so it would be impossible to protect, because now what you're doing is that you're able to use it to set off a nuclear bomb without having a giant explosion to compress the material to get the chain reaction. On the other hand, as a ballotechnic, there isn't a huge explosion required, which is what you need. You just have a lot of heat. So who knows? And so the science doesn't stand up. There's another big name and a huge brain that also shows up in the Fermi Paradox episode. These are some of the top scientists in this field. disagrees with him. So it's hard to say, but again, it posits an interesting dilemma here. Now, what he claimed, Samuel T. Cohen, is that the American authorities know it exists, but they're claiming it doesn't because the implications that it does exist and it's out there on the black market are too frightening to comprehend. So to quell panic, they just say, well, it's a fictional material and don't worry about it. Well, at the same time, oh my gosh, it's out there. Now, here's another claim made by Cohen that appears in the wiki entry here, that veteran nuclear weapon designer Dr. Frank Barnaby conducted secret interviews with Russian scientists who told him that red mercury was produced by dissolving mercury antimony oxide in mercury, heating and irradiating the resultant amalgam, and then removing the elemental mercury through evaporation. The irradiation was reportedly carried out by placing the substance inside a nuclear reactor. So, nuclear reactor, the bell, red mercury, there's obvious tie-ins, but are people adding these kind of bits of information way after the Bell story to make it juicier?
It's a good question, but there and again, here we go again with a game changer.
And this is why my argument is that red mercury is also the magic ingredient in stealth paint, or you can make metallic hydrogen with it. Another mystical...
It just does anything you want it to do.
That's exactly right. It's the magic ingredient that does whatever you want it to. But
which is a perfect cover for magic ingredients, by the way.
It just does,
because if you have magic ingredients and you're concerned about the intel of their makeup getting out there, you can just say, oh, it contains red mercury.
Right. And that's the thing. If you're not a physicist or nuclear scientist or chemist, but you got access to cash and you want to give your side a huge advantage, you just know you need it. So you go around asking for it, which is always, don't do that because you're going to end up on a 48 hours episode.
Yeah.
The thing with red mercury is that I don't care so much about that. I want to know what Zerum 525 was, and these things that create very experimental and possibly explosive plasmas.
Which in Zerum 525, just to restate for our listeners, is what they said also possibly the Bell operated on. In the interrogation papers, I believe.
Yeah, that was a code name for some kind of strange metallic fluid. Again, it might be one thing Chris had pointed out, rubidium, which we'd mentioned in part 1, under the flame tests, and I believe at high heat and under their experimental conditions, glows purple, which is another condition and description of the Bell was that once
during operation
fired up, this thing generated a deep violet purple color glow. The light blue glow, I believe, was seen by prisoners at the nearby concentration camp who saw barrel-like devices rising above the tree line and then descending again. That gives purpose and power to the argument of the anti-gravity device. So it opens up a bunch of questions. But as far as Samuel T. Cohen is concerned, his stance is that he's very afraid that now these things are being passed around undetectable and we should do something about it. And it works. So from my standpoint, I can't argue with him about nuclear physics. I can only say like, well, maybe that sounds a little shaky, but who knows?
All right, so this comes to one of the other theories that's a little bit on the crazier side, but also, incidentally, I believe the one that Witkowski is most behind. And that's the idea that the Bell was involved in some sort of anti-gravity propulsion device experiment. Whether the Bell itself was it, or it was creating power for that, or that kind of thing, how it was created. You can't talk about this without talking about, and they're not necessarily connected, but I do want to mention this, the Hanabu craft, which is a saucer-shaped...
traditional, like 50 sci-fi looking...
Yeah, sci-fi-shaped UFO that the Nazis built that had gun emplacements on it and supposedly first appeared in 1939. So let's talk about this. There are folks that will tell you there's credible evidence supporting the idea that this was developed. There's papers. You can find all this stuff online. I don't know how accurate it is. We did not, because this is not what this show was about. This episode was about the Bell, so we didn't do any hardcore fact-checking on the Hanabu.
My gosh, Nazi UFOs that's another section. We're going to get letters asking about this because there's a lot of fans out there I know, and I myself find it fascinating. That gets nuts, going to Antarctica and secret Nazi base there, all the way to the moon.
Well, you have to listen to this, and this really is a can of worms. And now, apparently, the Hanabu saw 4 generations of production, and it was built by an occultist subsection of the SS known as the Order of the Black Sun.
Oh, that sounds ripe for fictional purposes.
I believe that the way the Black Sun works is there's the presence of a black sun that is invisible in this dimension but still transmits power to us, to our dimension, and that there's a way to harness the power of this black sun and use it for things such as propulsion.
There's two branches, one sort of crazy, the other one not so sort of crazy. That, what you just described, is interdimensional beams of invisible energy being able to be harnessed, focused with concentration and thought and ESP and all that, and powering different things. That's the fringe side. The not so fringe side is that what you're kind of describing here is dark matter. They've known about dark matter, or what they called missing mass, since the 30s. This idea of the black sun is way before that, pre-turn of the century, or maybe even older if you believe some occultists that it is an ancient, even Sumerian type of idea, technology, power source. But the idea of dark matter is that this is what we currently now know about the universe, is that most of the universe is made up of this void energy, this dark matter. In fact, we said this before, that Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't even want to call it dark matter because it may not be matter at all. We don't know what it is. Owing to you, this made me laugh. He said, well, we should call it Fred.
Yeah,
because
he did.
He did say
Neil
that,
deGrasse,
yes.
I have made a joke in the
that
past
is not
about
confirming your Fred usage.
About God's name possibly being Fred. I think I was on Oak Island. When we were talking about the...
You've done it a few times, yes.
Yeah.
The Delta, the Golden Delta.
And then
the
out of the
Enochian
blue, Neil deGrasse Tyson says we should name dark matter Fred. I just want to say it validates
it validates not. He did not get that from you or listen to our podcast. Well, that would have been the really fun thing. Like,
it's synchronicity at the very least.
I will say that Fred's a good name. I'll give you that. It's a good name for this unknown, which we know now makes up most of the matter, 85%. And how they know this is also fascinating. Astronomers and astrophysicists can add up the mass of everything that we know about and can see. Black holes, comets, planets, stars, everything.
It's a big calculator.
It's a big calculator, and it's a lot of numbers, but it's a lot of number crunching, but it's only 14% maybe or less. And 85% of the universe, we don't know what's happening out there, although through microwave telemetry, we can sense that it's giving off energy. So the void is energy itself, and that's what we're talking about when we tie this in with the black sun, is that somehow Hahn and the Vril Society are able to harness this void energy and use it.
Well, the Hahn craft went all the way through 4 generations. The first one appeared in 1939 and supposedly used a revolutionary form of electromagnetism and anti-gravity propulsion.
Right. So now we're back to 0-point energy field propulsion for craft, which is provable here terrestrially on Earth that it works. It has not been, as we know of yet, applied to flying craft in outer space, but maybe that's what those black triangles are. Again, we're getting to 2 big questions I have about this whole topic. The first question, which we're approaching here, is something that Igor mentioned in his interview. And the question for me is, 1, then where did this technology come from?
Right. He said that he felt it was something that was, quote, given to them.
Unquote.
Given to the Germans, specifically given to the Nazi Germans.
Yeah. By whom?
Then that brings you to the question.
These guys look like they know what they're doing. We're going to give this powerful technology to them.
Yes, but in the great scheme of good and evil, you're definitely helping out the evil side, at least at that point, I would say. So,
well, okay, here's a dip into the tinfoil hat, even fringier.
Get them out,
area.
folks. Start folding your hats.
A lot of people have been asking for this, and we don't like to do it because then we get complaints where we're going too far.
That's what we do.
But here's a nugget for you that like that. If you get real way out there, then there are several races of aliens, and everybody knows this, who are really into Robert Christopherson, one of our ARC members, probably knows all about this. But you have several races of aliens out there. Some are good, some are neutral, and some are just plain bad. And the bad ones are the ones that were helping the Nazis. And the other theory is that, think about the time period. If this saucer crash in Freiburg, piloted by the Freiburg Shrieker.
To be clear, I want to restate that Hahn 1 first appeared in 1939, and the crash that Forrest is about to talk about was just 3 years earlier in the Black Forest near Freiburg, also home of the Freiburg Shrieker from 1978.
Right.
That crash happened in Germany in 1936.
Yes. Because,
although 3 years is a pretty quick turnaround for reverse engineering, unless it didn't crash.
Unless you got
unless
instructions.
it was a gift.
Yeah, it was a gift. It didn't crash, or it was pretty self-explanatory, and they found the driver's manual.
Right. It was just in the glove compartment.
The owner's manual. Yeah, so you flip through it, and it's readable. So, but you do wonder then, where did they get this quick ramp up of technology? Because remember, even with the discovery of splitting the uranium atom, that was all 1908 and past with the Curies and radium, and that was just getting going. Prior to that, nobody had any idea much about nuclear science. So it's a quick ramp-up time. So Ventry had posited that theory, not his, I don't want to tie him to that, but you got to wonder then, if this technology did exist, where did they get it? So that's one of the questions here we're trying to answer, that it was reverse engineered from this strange craft in the Black Forest.
Hanabu 1 was 25 meters or 82 feet in diameter.
Yeah, large.
Could theoretically travel 4,800 kilometers per hour or 3,000 miles per hour. It's just shy of Mach 4, by the way. However, it had a relatively low operational ceiling, meaning it couldn't go to a high altitude. Now, by the third generation, the Hanabu 3 was 3 times larger and supposed to obtain speeds 2 to 7 times faster than the first one. And on top of that, even Hanabu 1, I'm pretty sure, they could stay aloft for weeks. Whatever their system was, they could stay aloft for weeks. And they could carry a great deal of weight as well. Now, for me, this is very interesting stuff. And again, bringing it back to the Bell and whether or not it was an anti-gravity device or somehow involved in this, there's a couple things, and I already said one. If this was connected to a UFO crash in 1936 in the Black Forest, 3 years is a pretty quick time to turn it around, which is something that Igor also pointed out when we were talking to him.
Right.
And he felt more like the information had been given to them. And when he said that, I felt like there was something he was not telling us that he had been heard.
Me too.
Yeah.
Which then, of course, I intensely want to know, what is that information? Where do they get it?
Yeah. And I am a particular fan of the SR-71 Blackbird, the
me
Lockheed
too.
plane. Yeah, which just pretty much anybody who's even remotely into military stuff, which I'm not specifically, but I mean, this plane was amazing. And I actually just watched a 1-hour special on its development last week.
Right. That's one of the things that's actually being developed or was developed at Area 51.
It was developed at Area 51, and now you can see them at a lot of air and space museums, which is awesome. There's one on the Intrepid in New York City, and there's one right over there by USC here in Los Angeles at the California Science Center. It's mounted out near the parking deck, which is great. You park on the upper level, you can almost touch it.
As well as a defunct space shuttle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. Great place if you're ever in Los Angeles. And if you want to see an SR-71 in New York City, go to the Intrepid. There's one on the deck there. I believe it's still on the deck. I haven't seen it since they remodeled.
Right. But just imagine a plane that could fly so high and so fast. I believe their motto was unarmed, alone, and unafraid, because no missile could catch it.
That's right. In fact, there is a story of a missile that was shot at one, and they were able to evade it by more or less just stepping on the gas a little bit.
Right.
So, and it was still a little hairy. They were scared. I saw an interview with the pilot who was at the controls when that happened, and it was a 2-person plane. And it was a reconnaissance plane that took photographs. And at that particular case, the one that was fired on by the missile was flying over the DMZ in Korea, I believe.
Yeah. The only area still left in the world that is technically at war.
Yes.
Just a standoff there,
Super dangerous area. But my point about that aircraft is I understand what it had to go through technically to exist.
Right.
And only because I've watched some things on TV and read a lot of interviews with the pilots. And it's hard for me with the Hanabu 1, the technology has to go way beyond just the anti-propulsion device for it to be able to travel at those speeds, because the problems that the SR-71 encountered was that the air friction would heat up the surface so much that the metal would expand, and therefore when it was on the ground at normal, whatever you would call room temperature or outside temperature, the panels were loose and had gaps in them. And with the SR-71, they wanted it to be light. It didn't even have a bladder for fuel. So when they filled it up with fuel and it was sitting on the ground, the gas dripped out of it. Just dripped on the ground everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was a special kind of fuel called JP7, which was almost impossible to light. The engineers would drop cigarettes and matches right into it, and they would just snuff out.
Wow.
So they developed a special fuel. They got the plane. They got the panels are open. The fuel is dripping out of it. And here's the question. It's having to do all this stuff. Do you really believe that the Hanabu craft, let's just say we're accepting that it had an anti-gravity propulsion system, how could it be capable of these speeds without having all those same problems that the SR-71 had, which they found through proven practical test flights.
Right. Here's my thinking. This is not just alien technology. You are now at the branches, the departing fork in the road between two types of technology. With the SR-71 and the Aurora project and Scramjet.
These are follow-ups to the SR-71 that supposedly don't exist.
No, but you
Even
know,
though people have seen them.
We here in California, you've heard the double tap, a sonic boom going out over the ocean, which they believe is leaving from Edwards Air Force Base and returning. These thunderclaps, no plane visible, nothing.
Yeah.
They think that one might have been connected to the Aurora project.
And there's an SR-72 as well.
Right. And we're talking about the Dreamland, Groom Lake test bed connected to Area 51, that's where they take off from. They're so fast they can be out over the ocean in a minute and return. That is one branch of technology where you are using fuel, explosive or not. You are still combating the effects of friction in our atmosphere here and the problems and associated risks with flight. And when you want to get to the extremes, that's one of the rumors that is what's actually at Hangar 18. You remember that one?
Sure.
Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, center of a lot of UFO lore. What's actually there is a diamond-coated kill vehicle, which they call it. And it's not to kill people so much. It's a vehicle that can travel Mach 5, Mach 6, take down an ICBM missile within like 3 or 4 minutes after launch or a minute after launch, knock it out of the sky, return back to base, have lunch. And the reason it's diamond-coated is that's a protection against the tremendous amount of friction generated by traveling those kinds of speeds. So that's theoretical, but we do know the SR-71 exists and what it can actually do, and we know that...
And it's retired.
It is retired.
And this is a very important point that sorry to interrupt you, but it's a very important point. People, a lot of times when we talk about this kind of technology on the show, we hear from them, oh, it's impossible. I mean, the SR-71, that was 1960, I think, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Talk about impossible. If you had seen this thing, if you would have jumped the fence at Groom Lake, of course you would have been shot. But let's say you had, and you went in and you saw this thing sitting there that looks like a UFO, and you have to see it. If you haven't seen it, it's this long, beautiful, black UFO-looking
twin
spaceship.
engine.
Yeah. It looks like Batman's plane.
Ben Rich, somewhere along the line, the idea for the shape of this was inspired by the shape of a UFO that was seen.
Well, there you go. So the point is, if you had gone and witnessed all that in the mid to late 60s, and then came out and told your friends, or you wrote a blog entry about it, it's pre-internet, people would have, what are you talking about? That's impossible. Just think about the SR-71 is retired. It's been retired a long time. I don't even know how long, 10 years or more.
There was a long lead-in and a long delay before it's being worked on. The idea is conceived. Engineers are working on it, and it's made known to the public, and then it's retired. So you're seeing old technology.
Exactly. So what's out there now?
Precisely.
And that's something you always have to consider when you look back at what's happening here with the Hanabu craft, regardless of how it worked and what it did.
Right.
They were definitely working on things that were ahead of their time, because especially at war, you really ramp that stuff up. You got to get ahead. You got to get out there.
Right.
But you were saying 2 branches of physics. One has to deal with friction and that sort of thing.
Exactly.
And the other one?
That's the bleeding edge of the envelope in fuel, fire technology, which as a sideline here, I see SpaceX, and it's like, that is really cool. How quaint. We're still using fire to get into space.
Yeah.
And now we can land it upright like Buck Rogers could in the 50s. Nothing to take away from that. It's extremely cool and amazing, and I'm just astounded and blown away by it. But that is the one side. The other side is what we just mentioned a few times before here, field propulsion. There is no fuel on the craft. That's another great thing about interstellar travel. If you want to get even in long distances, then you're talking wormholes to make a jump, because, you can't be traveling for 200 million years.
You could.
You
won't feel so good when you get there.
No, even if you're sleeping, you're going to have to start working out. You'll be, flabby. But you are in a craft that requires no liquid oxygen fuel, no solid fuel. You are using the energy of the void, the dark matter, somehow, the resulting energy for your propulsion. So that's when they see field propulsion. That's very simplified, and I'm probably wrong, but that's the idea, is that you're not using fuel that's on board the craft. And it's provable in small cases. As far as we know, there's no spacecraft, but that's an idea to use that. So
yeah, a mouse purportedly hovered across a lab in Massachusetts. No,
really?
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, you were kidding. I'm very good. But that would be so cute, a little tiny UFO saucer. but
he's like, I'm out of here, through the window.
He could leave and then shoots a laser at you. Or at the cat.
Yeah.
Now, this goes also back to Area 51, and the lore of ufologists is that Bob Lazard, and a lot of people don't believe him, but he's a guy who claimed he worked there, and of course he doesn't show up. It's like, well, I didn't see him in the phone book. It's like, well, it's top secret. So hard to debate. A lot of people do believe him, But he was claiming that there was an element 115. Now, there's maybe clickbait, but that element 115 is this secret element that was discovered or reverse engineered or given to us or found at Roswell.
Isn't that also what they said? There were some rods of that at the Skinwalker?
Yes, there was something.
Wasn't that 115?
Right, but I believe that was spurious and not true. But the idea is an element 115 or even now 116 or 117, these crazy far-out elements, either not on the periodic table or just added. What they do is that they are so exotic that once properly ignited or employed, they basically open up a pocket of space-time. So when you see a UFO and it's making a crazy right-hand turn, that's not something even the SR-71 can do. You are defying the laws of gravity and physics. But what you have done is that in this 100% conversion of energy with this craft, and that, again, that goes back to Bob Lazard, and that's how these spaceships are able to fly, you are now not dealing with tremendous amounts of friction and gravity, because if you were making a right-hand turn, you would smash yourself against the inside of the craft and die. You would be a paste.
Right.
But that's how they're able to zigzag and do these crazy maneuvers, is that they have now opened up a pocket. And so you're basically slingshotting yourself from one pocket to the next.
So it doesn't have to worry about friction.
So that is the other lesser known and unknowable to us public people here technology, but it's rooted in real science. 0-point, anti-gravity, electrostatic, whatever you want to say, technology exists in some form. The John Hutchinson effect of metal being displaced, disruption, field disruption, all these kind of things. It's fringe science, and I'm sure a lot of regular scientists would say it's pseudoscience, and they might have a point. But there are kernels of truth in a lot of this stuff. It just hasn't been fully developed, in my opinion. So that's how you get away from a lot of the problems that we see with conventional terrestrial flight and engines and fire and fuel.
Hey, did you see that Squarespace Super Bowl spot?
Oh, the one with John Malkovich? Yeah, I did, and it was pretty funny. There's an even funnier alt spot on YouTube that I don't think they could air since they had to bleep him a lot. It seems Mr. Malkovich is very, very angry that someone else snagged johnmalkovich.com before he did.
You know what? That can and does happen a lot, and that's the point. Don't wait to make your next move. Get your own unique domain name before someone else does, and make your own beautiful website with Squarespace.
Of course, I did go and check and see if he actually got it, and he does, and it looks simple and clean, yet elegant and sophisticated. And you can have all that too, with whatever your next move is, whether it's advertising your business, showcasing your creative project, or simply creating a website to share news and photos with family and friends. Squarespace's beautiful, award-winning templates will make you and your content look its best.
Squarespace's 24/7 customer support is also award-winning, and their fully transparent, easy-to-set-up, all-in-one platform means there's nothing for you to install, patch, or upgrade, ever. They take care of the complicated stuff for you. Come visit us at our own new Squarespace website in a few days when it's finished.
Make your next move now. Use the promo code LEGENDS at checkout for 10% off any website subscription or domain purchase at squarespace.com.
That promo code again is LEGENDS. Squarespace. Make your next move.
Forrest and Scott, thank you for supporting their sponsors. I'm Ian Ulam, now back to the show.
Here's my thing about connecting the Hanabu to the bell. One is the bell seemed to have been primarily underground. And this is something I wanted to ask Igor about too. It was an underground device, but since somehow it was connected to the hinge theoretically and the fly trap, so maybe the craft they were testing was above ground, but the power from the bell theoretically provided power to the anti-gravitational. I mean, the thing is, if you're doing field propulsion, you don't need something to provide power.
No, unless maybe to turn it over, get it started. Like a,
yeah.
or like you see with conventional rockets, there's always hookups, but that's, liquid oxygen. There's different things, and then they disconnect when the rocket is launched.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, though, in case people aren't getting this, when we say the hinge, that concrete ring structure with the legs, there's kind of two different areas of thinking here, just very quickly. One is that it was a base of a cooling tower, not what you see now. On top of that was a giant contraption, which actually looks like, to me, Tesla's tower.
Yes.
The tower in New Jersey.
And this is, by the way, this is speculation. No one has a picture of that thing with anything above it.
That's all they're going by, is that the base looks very similar to existing structures of the time.
Yeah.
And that it's called the fly trap because it looks like an old-timey fly trap. That's what we meant before, just to clarify in case you didn't understand that.
And to clarify
in case you did not understand that.
Yeah.
So that's one idea, is that it was cooling something that generated a tremendous amount of heat nearby. The second theory that Igor is ascribing to is that it was a test rig, which means it either suspended this craft or was somehow, think about it like Jodie Foster in Contact, in that you have this spinning device that they drop the craft into the center of, that creates some kind of field vortex, blah, 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 torsion field, whatever. That gets her to the other dimensional interstellar travel. So Igor's thinking that it actually had some physical connection to the craft itself. Either it was suspended, tethered, something was spinning around it, whatever it was. That's the other method of thinking, because obviously it's the only thing left that we can look at.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, in connecting the bell to the Hanabu, how does it relate? It's not on board. It's not something that you get inside of and go somewhere. And this is another reason why, for me, the bell and Kecksburg don't line up, unless the Kecksburg situation is an unpiloted situation where this thing shot off like a bottle rocket from some secret site.
Yeah.
And it took the path it took.
Right.
Because they lost control of it, and it was the equivalent of a meltdown or a complete loss of control.
Right.
And then it crashed in Kecksburg, and they had to recover it, which is why the theory that Ventry mentioned coming up with the other gentleman about the GE Mark II reentry vehicle, which looks kind of like an acorn and was a suborbital and also orbital launch vehicle that took spy photos by going over the poles and returning, seemed more plausible to me with regard to Kecksburg. And also, I just don't think the Bell was this type of craft based on what we've learned about it in cursory research.
Right.
But I wanted to talk about something that Dr. Farrell said. Can you remind our listeners who Dr. Farrell was?
Yes, he is an author and a researcher, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, along with other authors like Jim Marrs and Henry Stevens, who have written books about the Nazi Bell and Nazi and occultism and Third Reich special weapons. Joseph Farrell's book that deals mostly with the Bell is called The Ss Brotherhood of the Bell, NASA's Nazis, JFK, and Magic 12. And he's got some other books we will list. He's done a lot of research on this, and he has some very different conclusions. He basically is going off of Igor's research, which is what everyone is kind of going off of Igor. He's the main guy. That's why we were so lucky to get him and glad to talk with him, and that he was so forthcoming. But Farrell's done a fair amount of his own research, and like I said, he's written books called Reich of the Black Sun, which deals with the power source and the Third Reich, and SS Top Inner Circle Brass, dealing in occultism and world domination and all kinds of crazy ideas. And as we mentioned before, he is also interviewed by Jim Harold on his Paranormal Podcast, episode 91. It was released 30th of June, 2009, and you'll have to become a member of the Paranormal Plus Club to get that. I am, and I greatly enjoy it, but it's called Nazis and the Bell.
All right, well, here's the interesting thing about Farrell, and why I wanted you to reintroduce him to our listeners, was he has said that the Bell and the craft at Kecksburg made a similar sound.
He mentions in his interview, which he may elaborate more in his books, but in the interview, he said that it made a similar sound, which I couldn't find any kind of kernel where that was suggested, but that's an interesting thing to say.
No indication of the sounds that either one made in anything that we've come across, but I will reiterate, and I said this earlier, we're still waiting on a copy of Igor's book, which may discuss the sound that it supposedly made in Germany anyway.
Right.
But I didn't see any eyewitness accounts that stated what the Kecksburg craft sounded like either.
People did see it come down. They heard the crash. I don't remember anybody like good old Woodrow Durenberger saying, it sounded like an old clunking sewing machine, like or a fluttering fan. There was no description of that I know of, but it came down. It did make a crash. People were aware of it. They were tracking it. The Kecksburg vehicle looked like it was under intelligent control, as they say. And John Ventry says that's because it has control jets on it. They have to steer this thing a little. So that's what people were saying, that even some descriptions that it kind of stopped a little, or looked like it stopped, depending on your angle of view, and made different turns. So they're kind of roughly piloting this thing down so it doesn't hit the town or land on someone's house. It's kind of going into the woods where they can retrieve it. Farrell's conclusion that it may have something to do with Bell technology, that this wasn't actually a flying Bell, but a craft based on this technology that was now being experimented on by the Americans because it was captured technology after
and
the
this
war.
was, and this was many years later, so in theory it would have developed. It would have been more manageable.
Right. So now you've gone
function.
Right. You have a different design. And he's basing it also on the description of it, the size, the shape, the dimensions are roughly the same. The reentry vehicle, again, is not something that's got Recaro chairs in it that you can sit around and pilot. This thing is it's a machine that takes photographs from a high altitude. Who knows what the Bell's got inside of it other than counter-rotating cylinders and very deadly fluids, but it's also not a drivable craft. But it may be the engine for other craft that is drivable.
Right. Maybe it's what makes the Hanabu fly.
Well,
However, this is the thing about the Hanabu. The last thing I want to say about that,
Sure.
we're going to wrap that up, is I'm pretty sure the Hanabu was airborne with multiple generations while the Bell was still in what we would describe as an experimental stage.
Yes.
Right.
So
it doesn't seem like it was ready to be deployed into a craft, which begs the next question. If the Bell's an anti-gravity device, what was making the Hanabu fly? If you believe in both of them, then obviously you're talking about two potential anti-gravity systems,
right?
Which seems far-fetched.
Well,
that this whole episode seems far-fetched, but I mean,
you got the piston engine, you got the rotary engine, you got the diesel engine. So in that vein of thinking, you may have similar related technologies in a much bigger scale, but veer off from each other in actual technological working. So we're all speculating here. Nobody knows about this. There's no plans or schematics, but they may have been two separate things with some ideas being shared between them. What Farrell says is that there is something similar about it at the time that the Bell was being evacuated. Again, they just didn't fly this thing to South America or Antarctica in their newly claimed territory called New Swabia, which is actually a real thing. They sent an expedition there in 1938, and they were planning to do more. So that fuels a lot of other theories, including The Spear of Destiny, which is also, along with The Morning of the Magicians, one of the two books titled that deal with Nazis and occultism and Nazis and UFOs. It's crazy. We had to curb ourselves. But again, there are based some actual things. World War II, Allied pilots did see Foo Fighters. There's actually a few pictures, if you want to believe that show some glowing orbs harassing our Allied aircraft, which I think was trying to disrupt them electromagnetically, almost like an EMP weapon, electromagnetic pulse weapon, to screw up the engine. Yeah. The other thing, the Third Reich was conducting research into advanced propulsion technology like rocketry, and Werner von Braun and Victor Schoenberger's engine research, and the flying wing craft, and Arthur Sack and the AS-6 experimental circular winged aircraft. So this craziness is actually based on some real items here. But of course, with fiction and movies and books and people trying to make it sensationalized, you do go off into different directions.
All right, so before we wrap this show up and get to our final conclusions on the Nazi Bell, I did touch a few minutes ago on the Vril Society.
Yes, this is under Section A, or Part 1 of the two main questions. Where did this thing come from?
Yeah. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the Vril Society?
Well,
this just comes back to the Black Sun that we were talking about earlier.
There's bigger discussions and there's bigger conspiracy theories out there. And the basic story is, and it's spelled V-R-I-L. The name first appears in a novel written in 1871 by Edward Bulwer Lytton called The Coming Race, or Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. It was titled later or reprinted later, more towards the end of his death. But do you know who that guy is? You actually did know.
Yeah, only because I read it the other day.
I see.
I did not know prior to that.
Are you folks out there familiar with the phrase, "It was a dark and stormy night"? Well, that's the guy who came up with that. And some other great gems, like "The pen is mightier than the sword," the phrase, "the unwashed masses." So he was actually very popular at his time. And some novels he wrote under a pen name, nom de plume. But he made a lot of money because they were very popular novels at the time, a little bit gossipy, some of them. But this is a fictional story about
science fiction, specifically.
Yes. So good science fiction. So if you're into that, check it out, regardless of the weirdo undertones. But it's a story about a race of very tall, good-looking
I think everyone should be warned that there are concepts within it that are popular with neo-Nazis, and we are not purporting to...
No, right. Like a lot of things, it has been appropriated by groups that, the originators have no control over, or the people following that, nor are we glorifying it any way. It's just some of the tones line up with their philosophy, shall we say. So they've appropriated it. But the basic story is that there is an underground population of these tall, good-looking beings that are telepathic, very smart, have advanced technology. And one of the protagonists of the stories goes underground by accident, I think through a crack in the ground somehow, or a fissure, ends up in this society there, interacts with them. But the power that they use is called the Vril, and they are able to master it. And it can be used for great healing purposes.
It's a liquid. It's some kind of liquid.
Yeah,
apparently, that they master. It's funny. You see all these I start thinking about like
Zerum.
Zerum, but also the abyss. And the other thing about the plot about somebody going underground is it has a lot of parallels to Metropolis, which was made in 1927 in Germany.
Oh, absolutely.
It was German Expressionism, the first real German Expressionist science fiction film.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite movies. When I was in film school, I loved it. And the main character, Frieder, I believe, goes underground where they're mechanically managing the society for the people above ground.
Absolutely. No, there is so much.
But that's a dual society thing. And this is a superior society that lives underground and supposedly fled due to flooding or something like that, but they have this utopian society underneath the earth, and they're going to come back.
What does that sound like? That's the Matrix.
Yeah.
There are so many books and movies tied in with this very general idea. Even Nazis and occultism is in Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's the nut of that story. It's such a prevalent idea. If you want to trace it back even to the times of Enoch and the Enochian underground chambers where secret knowledge is hidden, what do we have to deal with here as human beings on Earth? We've got the heavens, we've got the sky, and we've got the ground below us. So if it's not in the sky and we're not holding it, the magic is underground.
Right.
Like the Etruscans, they're autochthony, things
born from the earth.
Yes, literally coming out of the ground. So it's not a new idea, but the Vril idea, and coming from Edward Bulwer Lytton, here's a fun, fantastical kind of idea about strange, mystical beings that are very sexy and cool and fun to interact with. But their idea, though, is that at some point they're going to come back and take over the Earth by hook or by crook or by force.
By the way, the women are very empowered. And this was 1871.
Oh, yeah, sure. That's a progressive idea. Yeah, no, there's equality there.
Well, it's more than equality. It's superiority on the women's side because the women pursue the romantic relationships.
Right.
They marry the men. They rarely stay married more than 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, they leave them and
you have a choice.
And don't remarry, I believe. Right?
Yeah, you have a choice. You can either stay married or move on with no harm, no foul.
Right.
So it's kind of a progressive idea for the late 1870s. There are a few theosophists and occultists like Helena Blavatsky, William Scott Elliott, and Rudolf Steiner, the two of those we mentioned in the Count series.
Several times.
Yeah, as taking this crazy idea about the Vril, the power of the Vril energy and the black sun, and saying that, well, I mean, it's a fun book, but there are some kernels of truth in there, as according to occultism.
And now this is Blavatsky, who claimed that she knew the Count of Saint Germain as an ascended master.
Right.
So
who knows? But it's, again,
everything is connected.
Yeah. Well, the general idea about this time is that in the age of a revival of occultism and mysticism, leading probably into the 1920s and 30s. So it's starting here, yes, in the 1870s, there's more of an influence and a concentration on the beginnings of science fiction and Frankenstein and Dracula and all these crazy ideas. People are finding this exciting. And in Germany, you have the resurgence, Ariosophy, and Armanism, it's part of the Völkische Bewegung. Look, it's human nature for each generation to be nostalgic about the good old days. And in this time, in the late 1800s, in Germany, there is a popularization for folk, all things folk and old Germanic pagan rituals and customs and the idea, the purity of the German town and the folklore.
By the way, folks, if you haven't heard our Krampus episode, which we did a year before Krampus became the hot item.
Yeah, when it was hot.
Yeah, it was cool before it was cool. Our Christmas episode from our first year of our show, I believe.
I believe we needed a Christmas topic that first year.
Yeah, there's a little bit
came up.
You want to learn about paganism in Germany. That's a good show to hear about it. But go ahead, Forrest. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was going to say, so much has been made about this connection between Himmler and Hitler being really into occultism. And there are some people who've written some definitive books, Nicholas Goodrich Clark, The Occult Roots of Nazism. It's kind of the attitude I take is that there are some definite connections to Nazi philosophy and occultism and these ideas of superior races, of course, and this Völkische Bewegung sparking these ideas. And talk about a nuclear reactor of folk ideas. It's all happening at a time where you have the turn of the century. So then you have World War I, you have this developing sense of German nationalism and identity. all getting into a groundswell that turns out not so great.
Well, yeah, and it's funny you should say that. I do want to mention this one section on the Wikipedia page about the Vril Society.
Yes.
About Willy Ley, who was a German rocket engineer who had immigrated to the U.S. in 1937. In 1947, he published an article titled, quote, "Pseudoscience and Naziland," end quote, in the magazine Astounding Science Fiction. He wrote that the high popularity of irrational convictions in Germany at that time explained how National Socialism could have fallen on such fertile ground. Among various pseudoscientific groups, he mentions one that looked for the Vril. Quote, "The next group was literally founded upon a novel. That group, which I think called itself Wahrheitsgesellschaft, Society for Truth, and which was more or less localized in Berlin, devoted its spare time to looking for Vril." Willy Ley, by the way, is pictured on the Wikipedia page, standing with mid-level scientist Werner von Braun.
Really?
1954.
Yeah. Well,
But
he
anyway,
is a scientist himself.
No, yes, he is. He's a rocket engineer. So You're right. I love the way you just framed the cultural background, and that's an important thing to always do. One of the things that I remember from my all but useless degree in mass communications.
It's coming in handy here.
My
sort
Bachelor of Arts, yeah.
Yeah.
But I do remember learning in Mass Comm 101 about, I had this teacher who really impressed upon us, whenever you look at older films or older movies or you're reading older books or even you're studying history, you have to always consider the filters that everything is coming through.
Absolutely.
And what were the filters of the time? What was the lens that people were looking through? Because you can't go back and judge it by what you would think. Now, I mean, obviously there's some things that are right or wrong. Obviously the Holocaust is wrong. I don't care when it happened. But in terms of what Willy Ley is saying here about it being a fertile ground, because the general belief systems overall in the country were a little bit haphazard at that time, culturally, for whatever reason, which isn't necessarily in itself an evil idea, but it did allow the seeds for all of this other stuff to take root.
Well, yeah, you have the seeds, and then you have a catalyst, like World War I and Germany losing, and they were humiliated by their treaty. That's where it took a wheelbarrow of marks to buy a loaf of bread. These people, like, we're good people. We have great traditions with this Volkisch Bewältigung. I love just saying that. So, but that's where you get ideas like Armanism and Ariosophy, and it only takes a couple of people like Guido von List and Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels in Austria between the time period of 1890 to 1930 to publish some ideas, get people excited, especially people that have some influence in the local political scene in Munich, to get them fired up. And once you get people fired up and they're feeling downtrodden, they get behind something.
Yeah.
And it's not, sometimes it's, sometimes it's national pride, which, okay. And then other times that takes a nasty turn, which it did here.
Yeah.
But there's some other kind of interesting ideas, though, that are directly connected to the bell and the theories of, again, back to where it came from, is that there's some evidence left behind that there was, you could call it an SS general's inner circle retreat or club at the Wewelsburg Castle during this Nazi era. And what you get to fuel these stories and theories is that there's little bits of evidence that remain. And one being the symbol of the Black Sun, which is a floor mosaic at the Wewelsburg Castle, which was built in 1603, but was adopted as an SS general's retreat. And if you buy into the origins of the bell and the fringe theories, the crashed UFO in Freiburg in 1936 in the Black Forest, that device craft was taken to Wewelsburg Castle to be reverse engineered by the SS Generals Club, and I'm sure some high-level scientists.
Who had the Black Sun symbol
Who had the
as
black
a mosaic
yes,
on the floor.
Exactly. So
which you can see online, that picture.
No, and it's really there. It's a real thing. And there's a whole real tie-in with Germanic runes. It's a runic symbol. Some women in the Frankish kings era had brooches that had the symbol. It's a very old symbol. It's not just made up.
Do you think that all of this is just this melting pot of these ideas?
Absolutely.
All this paganism mixed up with the downtrodden time, and it's just crazy. And then all of this comes around to the bell, and and technology gets intertwined. It's just...
But there's a real thread. That's the crazy thing, is I straddle this line between fringe and way out there, and wait a second, that actually happened. That was a real thing. So yes, but to the degree of the importance or the actuality of things and being applicable to the story we're talking about here, Yes, there was a black sun design that was in the floor of this castle where SS generals did hang out, were reportedly 12 of them, marking the 12 months, did strange rituals trying to summon this crazy, black energy Vril power. And there was a Thule society that they think existed. But again, you'll see some historians saying like, well, there's actually no proof.
Not the company that makes the roof racks.
No, but
although
it's
it is
tied in.
spelled the same way.
In Greek mythology, it was a mythical northern country or territory. That's where they got that. And that's why people adopted that. Again, it's the glorification of like, we were once a great nation back in the, ancient Greek era. They spoke about us and we were the subject of myth and legend. That's what's getting people fired up. So you have the Vril Society, you have the Thule Society, which is possibly connected to the Nazis. So you have to look at what the historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark is kind of saying. It's like, well, yeah, a lot of it's inflated and fabricated to sell books. However, there are some actual tie-ins. There are some actual connections to real things. So look, we can only take you so far. The rest is your own judgment and rationality.
Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the Nazi bell. I think we need to hit our conclusions here. Forrest, is there anything that you want to say before we sign off for tonight?
Yeah, just on the idea of it being a technological device with three potentials, that of an energy source or a weapon, not even discounting auto certainty and the time machine idea.
Yeah.
Which we didn't get too much into, but it's, again, very speculative. The idea that it's a propulsion device, that I'm kind of leaning towards propulsion device experimentation, but I think whatever it was, and it had nuclear capabilities to it, or elements of it could be adapted for nuclear energy or nuclear weaponry. But I believe that its greatest potential was something to do with anti-gravity field propulsion that may or may not be ripping the time-space continuum. I know that's pretty way out there, but I don't think that it was tied in so much with nuclear fuel enrichment. It sounds like they were looking towards propulsion for a craft, and it did all these other wacky, deadly things, and they were like, whoa, we don't even know what we have here. There have been several things or ideas that have come along in the course of human history that have changed the world, and it's, things like what we just talked about, uranium, which is a rock whose power can light the world or it can destroy it. And its potential was discovered right before World War II, and it has changed how we do everything. So it makes total sense to me that another technology was being researched and developed by a group that had already demonstrated that they were the leading scientific force at the time. They had the brain power, the raw materials for the bell, and most importantly, the will to experiment with the unimaginable. So if the bell did exist as reported and could do the things that it could do, then for me, I just have three questions. Who has it now? What's being done with it? And how will it change everything?
Well, I don't suppose I have to remind you that Igor Witkowski first revealed on our show before anywhere else that the bell was in fact taken to South America after the war. And all this time, according to him, it has been an ongoing independent project that has continued to be refined and without any political agenda. He indicated that the current custodians of it actually reached out to him to tell him that its intended use will greatly benefit all of mankind. He told us, and this sounds like a line from a movie, but that its true purpose, possibly related to interstellar travel, will soon be revealed.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. We're dark next week since Scott will be in the Big Apple for a few days, but we'll be back the week after that with a new show.
We'd like to thank Harrys.com, the Great Courses Plus, and Squarespace for sponsoring the show. Please remember that supporting our sponsors supports Astonishing Legends.
Special thanks to John Boland.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Jose Garcia Chow.
I'm Ian Ulam.
I'm Heather Williams, and I give permission to Astonishing Legends
To use my voice however they see fit.
Galaxy-wide in perpetuity.
Alright, thanks.
Our show is edited by Sarah Voorhees, and the theme is by Judson Crane.
Sound design is by Ryan McCullough.
Special thanks to the ARC and its lead researcher, Tess Feifel.
But most importantly, we want to thank our listeners. You can find us online at astonishinglegends.com, as well as Facebook, Patreon, Twitter, Google+, and Instagram.
Copyright Scott Philbrook.
And Forrest Burgess. Good night.